My name is Nadine Calloway. I'm 62 years old. I was in the kitchen early that morning, buttering toast, when I heard Alyssa's voice from the hallway. She was on speakerphone, her tone bright and polished. The same one she used for work calls. Saturday night. Romano's downtown. She said, "Yes, just family. Colin's parents will love it." She laughed, a short, confident laugh. I paused mid-motion, the knife hovering over the toast. Just family. For a moment, I thought she must mean everyone including me. But the way she said it, brisk and certain, made something tighten in my chest. Alyssa appeared in the doorway then. Hair still damp from her shower, blazer draped over one arm. "Morning, Mom," she said quickly, smiling without really seeing me. "I'm running late." "Morning," I replied, watching as she poured coffee into a travel mug. Checked her phone again, and kissed the air somewhere near my cheek. "Big day?" I asked. She nodded, distracted. "Yeah, just meetings. Oh, and Colin's picking me up at 6. We've got that thing tonight." "What thing?" I asked gently. She blinked, halfway to the door. "Oh, the dinner for the promotion." Her voice softened for a second, then hurried again. "It's just family. You know, a small thing. I'll be home late." Before I could answer, she was gone. Heels clicking down the porch, the front door slamming behind her. The house grew still. The smell of coffee lingered, mixed with rain and the faint sweetness of her perfume. I sat down at the table, toast untouched, trying to convince myself she hadn't meant it the way it sounded. Just family could mean anything. Maybe she'd assumed I knew I was included. Maybe there'd been a mix-up. The hours slid by quietly. I cleaned, read a few chapters of an old novel, and kept glancing at my phone. Around 5. The sky turned a deep gray, rain streaking the windows like thin silver threads. Alyssa hadn't texted. Neither had Colin. At 6:30, I heard his car pull up outside. He stepped in, smelling of cologne and damp wool, his expression cheerful. "Evening. Nadine," he said, heading straight for the mirror by the door to adjust his tie. "You believe how fast this week went? Alyssa's promotion dinner tonight should be fun." He grinned at me through the mirror. "She's worked hard for this. Deserves to celebrate." I nodded. "Yes, she does." "Don't wait up." "Okay," he added casually, grabbing his keys. He turned to leave, then paused, opening the fridge. "Oh, there's meatloaf from last night. Don't forget to finish it. Hate for it to go bad." He shut the door, gave a quick wave, and was gone before I could say a word. I stood there for a long time, listening to the sound of rain tapping the roof. Through the window, I watched their car pull away, headlights glowing faintly in the drizzle until they disappeared. The kitchen felt too clean, too quiet. On the counter sat the plate he'd mentioned, covered in foil. A note stuck on top in Alyssa's handwriting. "Mom, meatloaf. Don't wait up." I turned off the light and leaned against the doorway. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator, steady and indifferent. Outside, the rain kept falling. The sound of their laughter still hung in the air when the front door clicked shut. I stayed in the doorway, one hand resting on the frame, watching as their car rolled slowly down the wet street. Colin's voice echoed faintly through the drizzle, cheerful, unthinking. "Don't forget the leftovers." "Mom." The words hit me before I could brace for them. I smiled, because that's what I'd trained myself to do when something stung, turn it into something harmless, something polite. But my hands were trembling, and I pressed them together to still the shake. Outside, the rain softened into mist, leaving the air cold and clean. I could see their taillights turn the corner, red fading into gray, then nothing. The silence that followed felt too heavy for the small house. I closed the door slowly and leaned against it. The warmth that had once lived in this place seemed to have followed them out. I used to think laughter gave a home its heartbeat. Now I wasn't sure what kept it alive at all. In the kitchen, the light above the sink flickered. The hum of the refrigerator filled the space like static. On the counter, the foil-covered plate waited, reflecting the soft yellow light. I peeled it back. 2 slices of meatloaf, congealed gravy, a spoonful of mashed potatoes. I ate standing up. Not because I was hungry, but because sitting down felt like too much ceremony for something so small. The taste was bland. The kind of food made without memory, something to fill a space, not nourish it. Halfway through, I put the fork down. The window above the sink showed only my reflection and the faint outline of rain against glass. I didn't look like myself anymore. My hair had gone silver so gradually I'd barely noticed. My hands were rougher now, the skin along my wrists pale and thin. There was no one left to tell me I looked tired. I rinsed the plate and left it in the rack to dry. The kitchen clock ticked loud enough to fill the silence, steady and indifferent. I thought of the years when evenings had meant something, Bill reading the newspaper while I finished grading essays. Alyssa at the table working on her spelling lists. We used to make meatloaf then, too. It had tasted better somehow, after Bill died. Alyssa insisted I move in with her and Colin. "It'll be easier for everyone," she'd said. "You won't have to worry about the house or the yard." And I'd agreed, thinking it was a kindness. Back then, this arrangement had felt like family shared dinners, shared laughter, shared grief. But little by little, things shifted. I became part of the background, the kind of presence people forget to notice until the dishes aren't done or the laundry piles up. When did my life start to shrink to this quiet rooms and half-eaten dinners? I tried to remember the last time someone asked me what I wanted. I couldn't. By 8, the rain had turned steady again, drumming gently against the windows. I sat in the living room with the lamp on, knitting a few rows of a scarf I'd started weeks ago. The sound of rain usually soothed me, but tonight it only made the emptiness louder. Every creak in the house reminded me that it was no longer mine, not really. My name might still be on the deed, but the spirit of the place had changed. It no longer listened to me. Alyssa had called this house our family home. She'd said it with such pride when her friends visited, showing off the old oak floors, the handmade furniture Bill had built decades ago. She always used though she'd never paid a cent for it. I didn't mind then. But now the word echoed differently in my head, like a small theft I'd let happen. The clock chimed 9. I turned off the lamp and stood by the window. Outside, the streetlight shimmered against the puddles, and in their reflection, I saw 2 faint shapes, Alyssa and Colin, walking together under one umbrella, laughing. It was just a memory, but it felt close enough to touch. I drew the curtains closed. Upstairs, their rooms were dark, untouched since they'd left. I walked through the hallway, touching the walls lightly as I passed, the way one does when saying goodbye without meaning to. In the laundry room, a basket of Colin's shirts waited to be ironed. I stared at them for a moment before turning off the light. Let them wrinkle, I thought. Back in my room, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened to the rain against the roof. Steady and unending. Somewhere between the ticking clock and the sound of water, the thought formed quietly. Without anger, something had to change. Tomorrow, I decided, I would wake early. I would take a walk downtown. Maybe stop by the library. Do something that belonged to me again. It wasn't rebellion. It was a beginning. The next evening, the house was still heavy with the quiet they'd left behind. I came home from the library with a bag of borrowed books and a chill in my coat sleeves. The kitchen light hummed faintly when I turned it on. On the second shelf sat the same plate of meatloaf, wrapped in foil, waiting like a reminder of everything I didn't want to think about. I peeled the foil back, reheated it, and set the table for one. It felt strange, formal almost, but I did it anyway. Knife on the right, napkin folded neatly, glass of water filled halfway. The little rituals made the silence feel less like punishment. When I sat down, the chair across from me caught my eye. For years, that chair had belonged to Bill. He'd sit there after work, reading the newspaper, tapping his pen against the table as he told me stories about the customers at the hardware store. His laugh had filled every corner of this room, big, round, unembarrassed laughter that came from his chest. Now the only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator and the rain pressing softly against the windows. I took a bite of the meatloaf. It was cold in the center. I chewed slowly, swallowed, then looked again at the chair. The cushion had flattened from disuse, the back slightly tilted from where Bill used to lean too far. I could almost see him there, head tilted back, smiling at something small and ordinary. The ache that came with the memory wasn't sharp anymore. It was slow, familiar, like an echo that had finally grown tired. I set my fork down and set it quietly into the still air, almost afraid to hear it aloud. This isn't home anymore. After Bill died, everything in the house seemed to slow down. The clocks still ticked, but time itself felt different, too wide, too quiet, like a room after guests have gone home. I tried to keep busy, rearranging drawers, cleaning out the shed, answering calls I didn't want to answer. But when night came, the silence became unbearable. I'd wake at 2 or 3 in the morning, reaching across the bed for him, my hand landing on the cold indentation where he used to sleep. Alyssa came over a week after the funeral. She moved through the house with a kind of nervous purpose, opening cupboards, taking down curtains, throwing away the half-used toothpaste by the sink. "You shouldn't be alone here," she said gently, placing a hand on my shoulder. "Not for a while. Come stay with us, just until you're ready." Her voice had the same certainty Bill's used to have when he wanted to protect me. I nodded because it was easier than arguing. I told myself it would only be a few weeks, maybe a month, until the ache dulled and I could think clearly again. I packed a few suitcases and left the house we'd built together without looking back. The first weeks with Alyssa and Colin were almost tender. Alyssa would make tea in the mornings while I read on the porch. In the evenings, she'd talk about work, about how she wanted to buy a bigger place someday. Colin would joke that the coffee maker never worked right unless I was around. It felt like healing. I cooked dinners for them, washed dishes, ironed a few shirts, just to feel useful. I told myself I was contributing, not replacing what they already had, but kindness has a way of hardening into habit. By the 3rd month, the rhythm changed. Alyssa's hours at the firm grew longer, and Colin started leaving sticky notes on the fridge. "Could you grab milk? Pick up dry cleaning if you're out." They were small things, never demands, but they stacked up like paper cuts. I didn't mind. Not really. I was grateful to have purpose. That's what I told myself. It's family. The nights got quieter again. Alyssa started working through dinner, and Colin often ate in front of the TV. I'd wait to eat until they were done, cleaning plates that weren't mine. Sometimes Alyssa would thank me. Sometimes she'd just sigh, distracted, and say, "You didn't have to do all that," but she let me keep doing it. When their first child was born, a little girl named Tessa, the house filled with life again. For a while, everything felt warm and whole. Alyssa would hand me the baby before leaving for work, saying, just for a few hours, "Mom, you're the only one she settles for." I didn't tell her that my knees ached from standing all day or that my eyes burned from lack of sleep. I didn't want to sound ungrateful. After Tessa turned 2, they stopped thanking me altogether. The babysitting became an assumption. I stopped going to the library, then to church, then anywhere that wasn't grocery shopping. The small world I'd tried to rebuild after Bill died shrank down to one street, one kitchen, one family that wasn't mine to keep. I remember one afternoon, standing by the sink while the dishwasher hummed, Alyssa came in wearing her suit. Scrolling through her phone, "We're running low on groceries," she said. "Can you stop by Safeway tomorrow? And Colin's shirts need pressing." I nodded automatically. She looked up then, smiling faintly. "You really do keep this house running, Mom. I don't know what we'd do without you." The words were meant as gratitude, but something in them felt off, like praise you give an employee after a long week. She kissed my cheek and hurried out. I stood there for a while, hands damp, the smell of detergent and steam filling the room. I thought of Bill, then how he'd come home smelling of sawdust, how we'd dance in the kitchen with the radio on low. Our house had been small, but it was ours. I remembered the porch light he'd wired himself, the one that flickered when the wind came in from the river. That house had felt alive. One night, maybe a year after I'd moved in, I mentioned going back just to check on things. Maybe spend a weekend there. Alyssa frowned. "Mom, that house is too big for you now. It's old. It creaks. You're better here with us." Colin nodded in agreement. "Besides, you'd miss Tessa." I smiled. Said they were right. But the truth was, I didn't know if the house missed me or if it had already forgotten. Years slipped by quietly. I paid for small things without realizing it: groceries here, a utility bill there. My pension covered most of it. And I didn't think twice. It was easier that way, easier to stay grateful, to keep the peace. Every time I thought of leaving, I'd see Tessa running toward me with her little arms wide and hear her call, "Grandma." It was enough to make me stay one more month. Then another, then years. It's strange how slowly a life can disappear without anyone noticing. You give a little, then a little more, until there's nothing left that's truly yours. And by the time you realize it, leaving doesn't feel like freedom anymore. It feels like betrayal. It was a Friday evening when Alyssa decided to host dinner for Colin's parents. She wanted everything simple but elegant, which meant I spent the day planning a 3-course meal, ironing the linens, and polishing the wine glasses that hadn't seen daylight since Christmas. Alyssa came downstairs just before 6, hair pinned in soft waves, her perfume lingering in the air like approval. "Mom, you don't have to overdo it," she said, glancing over the spread I'd prepared: roast chicken, roasted vegetables, a lemon tart cooling on the counter. Her tone was casual, but I could hear the relief underneath it. She wouldn't have to lift a finger. Colin's parents arrived with a bottle of red wine and the kind of practiced smiles that belong to people used to being served. Colin gave me a quick nod before taking their coats. Alyssa guided them into the dining room, her voice bright and performative. I hovered by the kitchen doorway, waiting for a cue to join them, but none came. Through the open archway, I could hear their laughter, the clink of glasses. Alyssa was in her element. Her laugh a little too loud, her words a little too smooth. Every now and then, I caught fragments of the conversation. They talked about vacations, about promotions, about how this house has such character. Colin's mother complimented the table settings, and Alyssa said, "Oh, Mom always has an eye for detail," with a quick wave in my direction before turning back to her guests. I stayed in the kitchen, carving the roast chicken and arranging the plates. When I brought the first dish out, Alyssa smiled politely, gesturing to an empty chair near the wall. "Just set it there, Mom." "Thank you." I nodded and returned to the kitchen. I could have joined them, pulled up a chair, but something in her tone, light, dismissive, made it clear I wasn't part of the scene. I was part of the service. By dessert, the house smelled of lemon and wine. Laughter drifted down the hallway as I washed the dishes. The sound used to warm me once. Now it only made the walls feel thinner. When the guests finally left, I heard Alyssa and Colin talking quietly in the living room. Their voices carried just enough for me to catch the edges of their words. "She really does too much," Collins said. "You should tell her to rest more." Alyssa laughed, soft but sharp. "Are you kidding? She should be grateful we let her stay. Some people don't have family to fall back on." I froze, one hand still submerged in soapy water. For a moment, I thought I must have misheard her. But then she laughed again, and the sound cut through me like glass. Grateful. That word again, so neat, so final. I dried my hands and turned off the tap. The kitchen light seemed harsher than before, the corners of the room smaller. Upstairs, I could hear Tessa stirring in her crib, her soft whimper turning into a cry. Alyssa didn't move. I climbed the stairs quietly and lifted the child into my arms, rocking her until her breathing slowed. In the dim light of the nursery, I looked at her small face and wondered if she would remember any of this: the smell of detergent, the rhythm of the washing machine, the way her grandmother's hands shook when folding her clothes. Later that night, I stood in the laundry room while the machine thumped steadily. I folded shirts into neat rectangles, stacking them with care. The sound of the cycle reminded me of a heartbeat, steady, mechanical, impossible to control. I listened to it until the spin ended. The drum went still, and the silence returned. Then I switched off the light and went upstairs, each step heavier than the last. The library had become my small refuge, a quiet space where no one asked for favors, only directions. I went there most mornings after tidying the house, pretending I had errands to run. The smell of paper and dust, the soft shuffle of turning pages, it reminded me of the life I'd left behind before Bill's illness, before Alyssa's temporary stay became permanent. That morning, the rain had stopped just long enough to let in a thin stream of sunlight through the tall windows. I sat in the reading corner, sorting through a pile of donated books for the librarian, Mrs. Hensley, who had long since stopped telling me I didn't need to help. Habit, I'd told her once. Smiling. Teachers don't sit still easily. I was shelving a stack of biographies when I noticed a girl standing near the front desk, clutching a torn backpack to her chest. 14, maybe 15, awkward posture. Eyes darting between the computers and the exit, like she wasn't sure where she belonged. "Can I help you?" I asked. She hesitated. I need to print something. For school. But I don't have my library card yet." Her voice trembled. That mix of embarrassment and defiance I knew too well. I'd seen it 100 times before, students trying to act grown while still hoping someone would step in. I walked over and smiled. "You can use mine today. Just this once." Her shoulders eased a little. "Thanks." As she logged into the computer, I noticed her fingers shaking. "Presentation?" I asked. She nodded. "For English, we had to write about a person who changed our life." She paused, biting her lip. I picked my aunt. She raised me after my mom left. There was something in the way she said it, no self-pity, just a quiet pride that made my chest ache. I helped her fix the margins, showed her how to adjust the font. The little things that made words look like they belonged. She thanked me 3 times before the printer whirred to life. When she left, she waved with a shy smile. "You should have been my teacher," she said. I stood there a moment, the words settling heavier than she knew. For 25 years, teaching had been my heartbeat. I'd spent my days coaxing confidence out of kids who didn't believe they had any teaching them to stand tall, to speak clearly, to trust their own words. And somewhere along the way, I'd forgotten how to do it myself. When Bill got sick, I told myself I didn't have time for anything else. Then, after he was gone, Alyssa's needs filled every corner of my day until there was no space left for my own. I'd told myself it was love, duty, family. But now, standing in the hush of the library, surrounded by rows of stories written by people who'd dared to use their voices, I realized how small mine had become. Mrs. Hensley passed by with a stack of returns. You're good with the young ones. She said, You ever think about volunteering here officially? We could use someone like you. I smiled politely, but something inside me flickered to life small, uncertain, but unmistakably there. Maybe I will, I said softly. As I left the library, the wind caught the edges of my coat, and for the first time in a long while, I didn't pull it tighter. The day felt lighter, and so did I. By the time the rain started, the house was already glowing with movement. The smell of perfume, the clatter of heels on the stairs, the hum of anticipation. It all filled the air in a way that reminded me of holidays, of parties Bill and I used to host when laughter still belonged to everyone in the room. But this night wasn't mine. Alyssa was radiant, wearing a black silk dress that shimmered when she turned her head. Colin helped her fasten the clasp of her necklace, his hand lingering at her shoulder, his voice low and full of pride. You look incredible, he said. She smiled, brushing invisible lint from his jacket. Tonight's big, she said. Everyone's coming, even the partners. Their energy was contagious, and for a moment, I let myself feel it, the happiness, the excitement. My daughter had worked hard for her promotion. I was proud of her. That part was true. But pride and pain often arrive holding hands. Will you be back late? I asked, pretending to sound casual. Alyssa checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, sliding her lipstick into a small clutch. Probably. Don't wait up. Okay. There's leftover soup in the fridge if you get hungry. Colin grinned at me as he adjusted his tie. Keep the house warm for us, Mom. I smiled faintly. Always. The sound of rain grew louder as they stepped outside. Colin held an umbrella for Alyssa, and she leaned into him, laughing when her heel nearly slipped on the wet step. The porch light threw a soft halo over them, their figures blurred by rain, their laughter bright and young and far away. I stood in the doorway long after their car pulled out of the driveway, the smell of wet pavement and perfume lingering in the air. Then I closed the door quietly, locking it with a click that sounded too final. The house exhaled into stillness. I turned off the porch light, changed into my sweater, and sat on the couch. The clock ticked. Somewhere upstairs, the pipes groaned with the weather. I reached for my phone not because I expected a message, but because it was something to hold. There it was, a new post from Alyssa. Her face glowed on the screen, framed by the soft light of a restaurant chandelier. Colin's arms circled her waist, his smile proud and easy. Around them stood Colin's parents, a few of Alyssa's colleagues, all dressed elegantly. The caption read, Family means everything. For a long moment, I just stared. The words blurred as my eyes stung. I looked at the faces in the photo, familiar, smiling, complete. Everyone but me. It wasn't anger that filled me. Not really. It was something quieter, a kind of hollow acceptance, the realization that somewhere between grief and survival, I had stopped existing in their story. I scrolled through the comments. Beautiful family. Congratulations. Alyssa, you deserve it. Love this, so proud of you both. Each one was a small confirmation that the image was true to them, that the world saw what Alyssa wanted it to see, a perfect life. A complete family. No one knew there was another person sitting alone in the house they'd left behind, still keeping the lights on. I set the phone down on the coffee table and folded my hands in my lap. They were shaking. Not from rage, but from something deeper, a recognition that I'd already been erased long before tonight. Not maliciously, not suddenly, but slowly, like a photograph fading in the sun. The rain pressed harder against the windows, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a cup of tea, and waited for the kettle's whistle to quiet. The room smelled faintly of lemon soap and steam. I thought of all the years I'd spent trying to stay useful, filling gaps, keeping peace. softening edges. I had thought that was what love looked like: service without complaint, gratitude without condition. But now, staring at the empty counter where Alyssa's coffee mug used to sit, I wondered if love could still be love when it was built entirely on invisibility. The tea cooled before I drank it. I left it there on the counter, untouched. Upstairs, I folded a blanket at the end of the bed, smoothed the sheets, turned off the light. Through the curtain, the streetlights shimmered against the rain, and for a brief second, I imagined Bill sitting beside me, his hand resting gently on mine. "She's doing well," I whispered into the dark. "You'd be proud of her." The house didn't answer, but I thought I heard the faint hum of the washing machine from downstairs, a soft, steady pulse, like a heart refusing to stop beating even after it's been forgotten. I lay down, listening to the rain until it blended with my breath, and somewhere between the sound of water and silence, I understood that the erasure had already happened, not when Alyssa left me behind tonight, but long before, when I stopped insisting that I still existed. The next morning began like any other. The faint hiss of rain on the kitchen window, the hum of the refrigerator, the small, familiar weight of routine pressing gently against me. I moved through the motions, turning on the coffee maker, rinsing the same cup I always used until I opened the fridge. There it was again. A plastic container wrapped in foil, a strip of masking tape stretched neatly across the top. In black marker, Colin's careful handwriting, "Mom Meatloaf." The words were meant to be helpful, I suppose, practical, but the moment I read them, something inside me shifted. The label wasn't kindness anymore. It was ownership, like a reminder of my place. A quiet instruction disguised as thoughtfulness. I lifted the container, my fingers pressing against the cold plastic. The condensation left small beads of water on my skin. I set it on the counter, stared at it for a long time, and then reached for my phone. The click of the camera was almost too soft to hear, but it felt loud inside me. I didn't know why I took the picture, maybe to remember, maybe to prove that this moment was real, that I wasn't imagining what my life had become. The photo glowed on the screen, plain, ordinary, almost absurd. A box of leftovers labeled like a possession. I looked at it, then whispered, "No more." The words came out small, but they were steady. They hung in the air for a second before the refrigerator motor kicked on again. Swallowing the sound, I sat at the kitchen table, the one Bill had built decades ago from old oak boards, and pulled out a notepad from the drawer. My hands hesitated at first, unsure what they were supposed to write. The pen hovered over the page like it needed permission. For years, I had written things for others' grocery lists, thank you notes, permission slips, instructions for babysitters, words that served a purpose but never truly belonged to me. Now, for the first time in a long time, I wrote for myself. I started simply, "Dear Nadine," then I stopped, staring at the name. It looked strange, foreign almost, like seeing my reflection after years of forgetting my own face. I began again, "Dear Nadine, you are not invisible." The pen moved faster after that. I wrote about the house, the dinners, the laughter I'd stopped sharing, about how pride had turned into silence, how love had softened into obligation. I wrote about the label on the box and the way it made my stomach twist, about how much I missed the woman who once stood in front of a classroom and told her students that every voice mattered. Halfway through the page, I realized my hands weren't shaking anymore. It wasn't a goodbye letter, not yet. It was something quieter, more deliberate, a promise, maybe. A map out of the small life I'd been pressed into. The rain had stopped outside, leaving the windows streaked and shining. Light crept across the table, warming the edge of the page where my pen rested. I closed the notebook and slid it into the drawer beneath the tea towels. Beside the small envelope that still held Bill's last note to me, "Don't forget, the world is still yours." Nadine. I hadn't understood what he meant back then, but now, sitting in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by the faint smell of meatloaf and lemon soap, I finally did. I threw the labeled container into the trash, washed my hands, and turned off the kitchen light. The faint echo of my own words no more followed me down the hallway, soft but certain, like the beginning of something I hadn't yet dared to name. The first time I saw the flyer, it was pinned to a corkboard at the library senior assistant's desk, free legal and financial guidance. Thursdays, 10 a.m., 2 p.m. It was printed on cheap paper, the kind that curls at the corners. But something about it made me pause. I tore off one of the little tabs at the bottom, folded it into my pocket, and told myself it was just curiosity. 2 Thursdays later, I walked into the community center. The building smelled faintly of coffee and disinfectant, and the walls were lined with posters about meal programs and Medicare updates. I almost turned back twice. My errands, my list, my routine, they were all waiting. But the flyer had stayed on my dresser all week, and that small folded tab felt heavier every time I saw it. The volunteer table sat near the window, where morning light fell in soft rectangles across the floor. A man in his 70s looked up from a stack of folders when I approached. He had silver hair, wire-rimmed glasses, and the kind of patient expression that comes from decades of listening before speaking. "Good morning," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I'm Tom Keene, retired lawyer, part-time volunteer." His handshake was warm, steady. "I'm Nadine," I said. "I'm not sure if this is the right place for my question." "Most people aren't," he said kindly. "Why don't we start there?" We sat across from each other at the long folding table. I took a breath, trying to sound casual. "It's about my house. Well, it was mine. My husband and I bought it years ago. But my daughter's been handling the bills since he passed. I just wanted to know if, legally, it still belongs to me." He nodded, reaching for a blank form. "Do you happen to have any documents, deed, mortgage statements?" Anything like that. I pulled out the manila envelope I'd brought, filled with old papers I'd kept more out of habit than intention. He spread them across the table, his eyes scanning each page with a quiet efficiency that made me nervous. The sound of his pen tapping faintly against the table was the only thing breaking the silence. After a few minutes, he stopped and looked up. "Mrs. Dyer," he said gently, "this house is still in your name, solely yours. Your husband's name was never added to the title after you refinanced in '98. I blinked. That can't be right. Alyssa said she told me everything transferred to her after Bill passed. Mr. Keene shook his head. Your daughter may have been handling payments, utilities, taxes, maintenance, but that doesn't change ownership. You're the legal owner. Every record here confirms that." The words landed slowly, like pebbles dropped into deep water. I felt something stir inside me. Confusion first, then disbelief. And finally something I hadn't felt in years, the faint thrum of possibility. I leaned back, my fingers tightening around the edge of the table. "So, she can't sell it. She can't make any decisions about it without me." He smiled kindly. "Not unless you give her written authority, which, by the look of things, you haven't." For a long moment, I couldn't speak. My life for the past 5 years had been built on the quiet assumption that the house no longer belonged to me, that I was a guest, a relic of an older life. Now, suddenly, the ground beneath that assumption had cracked open, revealing something solid underneath. Mr. Keene gathered the papers neatly and slid them back toward me. "You might want to visit a notary or real estate advisor," he said. "They can help you explore your options, selling, renting, or transferring ownership if you wish. But make sure whatever you do is your choice. My choice. The phrase echoed in my head long after I left the community center. Outside, the air smelled like spring rain, and the sunlight caught in the puddles as if the whole world had turned to glass. I walked home slowly, clutching the envelope to my chest. Each step felt unfamiliar, heavier, but also steadier. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the rain tapping against the roof, my mind looping through Mr. Keen's words. "It's still in your name." By morning, something inside me had shifted completely. I made myself coffee, ironed my blouse, and went through the drawers until I found the old notary card Bill used years ago. The edges were yellowed, the ink fading, but the address was still legible. 2 weeks later, I sat across from a woman named Renee at a small notary office downtown. The place smelled faintly of paper and lavender polish. She was middle-aged, kind-eyed, with nails painted a soft blue. "So you're looking to confirm property ownership?" she asked. "Yes," I said, "and I want to understand what it would take to sell." She typed something into her computer, then turned the monitor so I could see. There it was, our old house. My name. Only my name. "It's entirely yours," she said. "If you chose to sell, you'd simply need to list it, sign the agreement, and provide proof of title. Everything else can be arranged through an agent." Her voice faded into the background as I stared at the screen. I wasn't thinking about selling, not yet. But the knowledge itself was like a pulse running through me. For years, I'd thought of myself as a guest, a burden, a shadow in someone else's home. Now I realized I'd been living inside my own walls all along. When I left the office, the wind was sharp, the kind that wakes you up. I walked to the bus stop without rushing. My reflection flickered faintly in a puddle beside the curb, older. Yes, but still there. That night, as I sat by the window, I opened my notebook again. The letter I'd started weeks ago waited patiently between its pages. Beneath the line that read, "You are not invisible," I added a new sentence. "You still have the keys. Use them." And for the first time in years, the quiet around me didn't feel empty. It felt alive. The plan began quietly, almost by accident. At first, I only meant to gather information to understand what was possible. But once the idea rooted itself, it refused to let go. I started with a call to a realtor whose name, Renee, the notary, had given me. Her voice was warm, brisk, professional. "Of course, Mrs. Dyer," she said. "We can schedule a viewing for potential buyers anytime you're ready. Everything can be handled discreetly." That word discreetly felt both comforting and dangerous. The first meeting was on a Tuesday morning. I told Alyssa I was spending the day at the library. She barely looked up from her phone, murmuring something about Colin's conference call and Tessa's playdate. "Sure, Mom. Don't forget to pick up more detergent if you stop by the store." I nodded and slipped out the door. The realtor, Marlene Ahn, met me outside the craftsman house that had been my world for nearly 40 years. The sky was pale and windless, the kind of day that makes every sound echo. She was younger than I expected, maybe in her 40s, with dark hair pulled into a neat bun and a clipboard tucked under her arm. "It's a beautiful property," she said. Stepping inside, original woodwork, updated plumbing, good neighborhood. Homes like this don't stay on the market long. I followed her through the rooms, each one echoing with footsteps and ghosts. The living room still smelled faintly of lemon polish. The kitchen window caught the same light it always had when Bill stood there in the mornings. I traced my hand along the doorframe he'd built, feeling the small nick where he'd mismeasured once and laughed it off. Marlene talked about square footage and market value. I nodded, hearing only fragments. The sound of my own heartbeat was louder than her voice. "Would you like to set an asking price?" she asked. I hesitated. "Something fair," I said finally. I don't need to squeeze it. I just need it done. Her eyes softened in understanding. Then we'll handle it quietly. No for sale sign. No open houses. Just private viewings. When she left, I stood in the entryway, holding the folder she'd given me. The air in the house felt different now. Charged, uncertain, alive. I didn't tell Alyssa. I couldn't. Over the next several months, I built my double life with careful precision. Mornings were the same as always, making breakfast, folding laundry, pretending the rhythm still fit. But afternoons became my secret hours. When I said, I'm going to the library, it meant I was meeting inspectors or signing papers. When I told Alyssa, I'm running errands, it meant I was reviewing listings for small apartments near the coast. Each lie sat heavy on my tongue, but the truth underneath it was lighter than anything I'd felt in years. Marlene called me one morning in late May. We've got an offer, she said, above asking price. My hand tightened around the phone. That was fast. Good homes find good buyers, she replied. Would you like me to move forward? I looked out the window. Alyssa was in the driveway, loading groceries into the car, her phone tucked between her shoulder and ear. She was laughing at something I couldn't hear. Yes, I said softly. Move forward. When the papers arrived, I signed them at the kitchen table while Alyssa was out. My hand trembled, but the pen didn't hesitate. Every stroke of ink felt like reclaiming a piece of myself I'd misplaced. The sale closed in early June. The funds went directly into an account I'd opened quietly, one with my name alone. I told myself it wasn't deceit, not really. It was self-preservation. I found the apartment a week later, a small one-bedroom in Astoria, just a few blocks from the waterfront. The photos showed a narrow balcony overlooking the river, pale blue walls, and enough sunlight to grow plants again. Bill and I had visited Astoria once on a trip years ago. He'd fallen in love with the fishing docks and the way the fog rolled in like breath over the water. Someday, he'd said, we'll retire here. You can read, I'll fish, and we'll eat dinner watching the ships come in. We never made it. But I could. The first time I visited the building, the air smelled of salt and cedar. A woman named Marta showed me around. It's small, she said, apologetic. It's perfect, I replied. Back home, I began packing in secret, just small things at first: books, photo albums, the quilt Bill's mother had made. I wrapped each one carefully and labeled the boxes only with numbers. When Alyssa asked why the closets looked emptier, I said I was organizing. She smiled absently. Finally, she said, You've been talking about decluttering for years. Each night, I hid a few more boxes in the garage, behind old furniture no one used. The movers would come next month, scheduled for a weekday when Alyssa and Colin would both be at work. Marlene had handled everything with quiet efficiency. I kept my routine intact to the end. Coffee in the morning, laundry folded by noon, dinner ready by 6, the life of a woman who had no secrets, no plan, no pulse but service. But inside, I was changing. Each step toward freedom felt like peeling off a layer of skin raw. Necessary, painful. Some nights, guilt hit me hard. I'd imagine Alyssa walking through the door after work, calling Mom into an empty hallway, realizing I'd gone. That image twisted in my chest, yet beneath the guilt was something stronger: peace. It glimmered just ahead of me, quiet and patient, like the shoreline at the end of a long road. One evening, as I folded the last of the laundry, I found one of Tessa's drawings tucked between the towels, a crayon picture of a house, a stick figure family, the word Grandma written in a bright red heart. I sat with it for a long time, my throat tight. Then I placed it carefully into the box marked 1. It would be the first thing I unpacked in Astoria, the night they went out to celebrate. The house felt unusually calm. No clatter of heels on the stairs, no phones ringing, no television humming in the background. Just rain outside, soft, steady, familiar. I'd spent the afternoon finishing the last of the packing, labeling each box with small, neat numbers. The movers would come in the morning. I'd already arranged the key handoff and wired the payment for the new apartment. Everything was done. Almost. The kitchen gleamed under the warm light. I'd cleaned it the way my mother used to before guests came over, countertops wiped, silver polished. Towels folded perfectly on the oven handle. The only thing left was the letter. I sat down at the table with a sheet of cream-colored stationery. It was from a box Bill had given me years ago. He'd always said I deserved paper meant for something important. My handwriting came slow at first. Uncertain, like testing a voice I hadn't used in a long time. Alyssa and Colin, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The pen hovered there for a moment before I continued. This house was never your gift to use. It was my promise to keep. And now I'm keeping it. I told them the truth without anger. Only clarity. How I had loved this home. How Bill had built it with his hands and his hope. How I had stayed here for years after he was gone, trying to make it a place of belonging again. How I'd mistaken silence for peace and sacrifice for love. You may think I've betrayed you, but I've simply remembered myself. I paused, listening to the rain against the window. Somewhere, I could almost hear Bill's voice, soft, approving. The house has been sold. The new owners will arrive in the morning. You'll find your belongings in the guest room and your mail forwarded. There's food in the fridge, and Tessa's drawings are packed safely in a box labeled family. Take them with you. They deserve a better home than the one we built from duty. The words flowed easier after that. I wrote about gratitude, not the kind that was demanded, but the kind freely given. I thanked them for letting me see my granddaughter grow, for reminding me that love can be both gift and cage. I wished them kindness. Even if they couldn't yet wish it back, I'm leaving for the coast. A small place near the water. You don't need to find me. When you're ready to understand, you'll know where to look. At the bottom, I signed simply Mom. I folded the letter once, slid it into the envelope, and sealed it. My hands didn't shake this time. The fruit bowl sat in the center of the table, apples polished, a small bunch of bananas starting to brown. I placed the envelope beside it, exactly where Alyssa would see it first. The paper looked soft against the wood, like something that belonged there. Then I stood, untied my apron, and folded it neatly on the counter. The kitchen clock ticked toward 10. I moved through the rooms slowly, turning off lights one by one. The living room, the hallway, the den where Bill's old radio still sat silent. In the dim glow of the final lamp, I took one last look around. The walls that had once held laughter now held only memory, but even that felt lighter now, no longer a weight, but a whisper of what had mattered. At the front door, I paused. My coat hung on the same hook it had for 20 years. I slipped it on, opened the door, and stepped into the rain. The porch light flickered once, the way it always had, then steadied. I pulled the door closed behind me until I heard the latch click into place. And as I walked down the driveway, the house stood quiet, every window dark, every room finally at rest. The road curved alongside the Columbia River like a silver ribbon under the moonlight. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the pavement slick and shining. The world washed clean. My hands rested easily on the steering wheel, the rhythm of the tires on wet asphalt steady as breath. It had been years since I'd driven this far alone. The headlights stretched ahead, catching the outlines of pine trees and the faint shimmer of water between them. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of a freight train moved with me, a companion in the quiet. I turned on the old car radio. Static first, Then a familiar melody broke through an old folk song Bill used to hum while fixing things around the house. Without thinking, I joined in, softly at first, then louder. The words coming back like muscle memory. My voice sounded older now, rougher, but it didn't matter. It filled the car the way laughter used to fill our kitchen. Near midnight, I spotted the glow of a diner just off the highway, a small place with a flickering neon sign that read Riverside Cafe. I pulled in, the gravel crunching beneath the tires, and stepped inside. The smell of coffee and cinnamon hit me first. A waitress with tired eyes and a kind smile brought me a slice of apple pie without asking what I wanted. "On the house," she said. "Long night, long life," I answered, smiling. The pie was warm, buttery, the crust flaking at the touch of my fork. I hadn't realized how hungry I was until that first bite. Around me, the world felt softer, less sharp. When I got back on the road, the clouds had begun to thin. Through the breaks, the stars showed themselves quiet, steady, ancient. The ache of grief was still there, but it had changed. It no longer pressed down on me. It drifted beside me, light as mist over the water. I rolled down the window, let the cool night air brush against my face, and whispered into the open dark. We made it. Bill, Astoria was still miles ahead, but for the first time, I didn't feel lost. I felt on my way. The apartment was smaller than I remembered from the photos, but the moment I opened the balcony door, the scent of the river rolled in salt. Pine. A hint of rain. The air was crisp, carrying the sound of seagulls and the faint hum of fishing boats. From the railing, I could see the bridge stretching across the Columbia, its steel arch cutting against a pale morning sky. I set my suitcases down and just stood there for a while, breathing. The quiet was different here. Not heavy, not watchful, just quiet. The next morning, there was a knock on the door. When I opened it, a small woman with silver hair and a nurse's posture stood holding a basket of muffins. "You must be the new tenant," she said, her voice brisk but kind. "I'm Margaret Dunn. Everyone calls me Maggie. Apartment 2B." Her eyes were sharp but friendly, the kind that had seen much and judged little. She stepped inside without waiting for an invitation, looking around approvingly. "You've got the best view in the building," she said. "I always tell the landlord this place needs someone who appreciates silence. You look like that kind of person." I smiled. "I might be." She left the basket on the counter. "Blueberry. Still warm. And if you ever need company or salt, or a screwdriver, you knock." After she left, the apartment smelled like muffins and river wind. I unpacked slowly the quilt, the photographs, the framed drawing of the house Tessa had made. I placed it by the window, where sunlight caught the crayon lines. That evening, I found a small notebook in one of my boxes, the same one I'd used for my letter to myself. Its first page was still open, the words faint but firm. "You are not invisible." I took a pen and began again. "Breathe. The air here tastes like freedom. Mend. The ache is still there, but softer now. Live. No one is waiting for me to serve dinner. No one is calling from another room, and still, it feels full." Each word anchored me, each line a promise. As the sun sank behind the river, I sat on the porch with a blanket and one of Maggie's muffins. The water shimmered gold, then silver, then dusk blue. A fishing boat passed, its light flickering like a heartbeat. I leaned back in the chair, the air cool against my skin, and felt the quiet settle not as emptiness, but as peace. For the first time in years, I was home. The house was dark when Alyssa and Colin pulled into the driveway, laughter still clinging to them from the night's celebration. The porch light glowed faintly, casting a thin line of gold across the front steps. Alyssa kicked off her heels as soon as she stepped inside. "Mom," she called. No answer. Colin headed straight to the kitchen, loosening his tie. "Smells like she cleaned," he said, opening the fridge. The shelves were empty except for a single carton of milk and half a lemon. The counters gleamed. Even the fruit bowl looked arranged. Almost staged. Alyssa frowned. "That's strange. She always leaves the porch light on when we're out." Colin noticed the envelope first. Sitting neatly beside the fruit bowl, her name Alyssa written in familiar, deliberate handwriting. He tore it open before she could stop him. The paper inside trembled in his hands as he read. Alyssa watched the color drain from his face. "What is it?" she asked. He handed it to her wordlessly. She read the first lines aloud, her voice catching. "This house was never your gift to use. It was my promise to keep. And now I'm keeping it." Her eyes widened. What does that even mean? Before either of them could process it, Colin's phone began to ring. He glanced at the caller ID. "It's the realtor," he answered. The conversation was brief. His responses clipped. When he hung up, his voice was low but sharp. "She sold the house." Alyssa blinked. "No, that's impossible. She couldn't. She doesn't even handle the paperwork. She didn't need to." He snapped. It was in her name. Always was. The air in the kitchen shifted. Alyssa's jaw tightened as if the words had slapped her. "You mean, we were living in her house this whole time?" Colin didn't answer. He sank into a chair, rubbing his forehead. "She's gone. Alyssa, the realtor said the new owners take possession tomorrow morning." The room seemed to close in on them too clean, too quiet, too empty. Alyssa read the letter again, her voice breaking over the last line. "You don't need to find me. When you're ready to understand, you'll know where to look." Her hand trembled. "She can't just leave," she whispered. "After everything we've done for her." Colin's laugh came out harsh. "Everything we've done, Alyssa. We were living rent-free in her house." "Don't," she said sharply, tears pooling in her eyes. "Don't turn this on me." But neither spoke after that. The silence spread like a shadow across the room, swallowing the echo of their argument. Alyssa sat down heavily, the letter still in her hands. For the first time, she looked around the house and saw it differently, not as hers, but as borrowed space, filled with someone else's love and labor. The fruit bowl gleamed under the light, the envelope resting beside it like a final punctuation mark. Miles away, in a small apartment above the river, Nadine watered a potted fern on her porch. The evening breeze brushed her hair as she set the watering can aside. The water shimmered on her fingertips. She rubbed it between them. Smiling faintly, it felt like freedom, cool, real, alive. It was a gray afternoon when the knock came at my door. The rain had just begun again, tapping softly against the balcony railing. I'd been writing another journal entry, one that began with "listen" when the sound startled me. When I opened the door, Alyssa was standing there. Her hair was damp from the drizzle, her coat wrinkled from the drive. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. "Mom," she said finally. Her voice was thin, unfamiliar, as if she'd borrowed it from someone gentler. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside and nodded. She entered quietly, eyes flicking over the small apartment, the single armchair, the bookshelf, the pot of ferns near the window, her hands twisted together as if searching for something to hold. "This is nice," she said softly. "Different. It's enough," I replied. She nodded, then looked toward the balcony where the river shimmered through the mist. "I didn't know you were here," she said. "I found the address from a forwarding notice. Colin didn't want me to come." I set the kettle on the stove, keeping my hands busy. "But you came anyway." Alyssa sank onto the couch. I couldn't stop thinking about the letter, about the house, about everything. Her voice wavered, then steadied. "I wanted to say I'm sorry." for how things turned out, for how we treated you. I turned off the stove before it whistled. You don't owe me that, I said quietly. Yes, I do. She insisted. We were just overwhelmed between work, the kids, bills, everything felt like too much. And you were there. And it was easier to lean on you than to really see you. I didn't realize how unfair that was until you left. I carried 2 cups of tea to the table and sat across from her. She looked older than I remembered, tired, edges softened by regret. You were overwhelmed, I said slowly, by having someone you could depend on. And when that stopped, you mistook it for abandonment. She flinched slightly but didn't argue. Maybe. I just wish I'd understood sooner. Silence filled the room. Not heavy this time. Just full. Outside, the rain slowed to a drizzle. I sold the house. I said finally, because it stopped being home long before I left. Not because of anger, because of survival. Alyssa's eyes filled. I know. I see that now. We sat like that for a while. The steam from the tea curling between us. When she finally reached across the table, I took her hand. Her fingers were cold. I missed you, she whispered. I missed the idea of you, I said softly. The one I thought I still had. Her grip tightened, then loosened. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. After a few minutes, she stood, smoothing her coat. I should go. The drive back is long. I followed her to the door. We hugged an embrace that carried both apology and distance. When she stepped into the hallway, she turned once more. You really look happy here. I am, I said. She smiled faintly. And for a moment, I saw the child she used to be, the girl who'd held my hand crossing streets, who'd once believed her mother could fix anything. Then she turned and left. I watched her walk to her car, the rain falling gently around her. When the engine started and the taillights disappeared into the gray, I closed the door. The air inside was still warm from the tea. Carrying the faint scent of bergamot and rain, I sat back at the table, opened my journal, and wrote one word at the top of a new page. Release. A year slipped by like the tide beneath the bridge, steady, unstoppable, gentle in its own way. By then, I had settled into the rhythm of Astoria. Mornings were for the Riverwalk. Afternoons for the literacy group at the community center. Most of the women who came were older. Like me, retired seamstresses, grandmothers, widows all learning to write letters, lists, stories. Some wrote to children they hadn't spoken to in years. Others wrote to themselves. I helped them find words that had once felt unreachable. Every time I saw the spark in their faces when they realized they could write their own names, I felt something deep inside me settle, teaching again quietly. Without grades or pressure, felt like coming home to a part of myself I thought I'd lost. That evening, after class, I walked back to my apartment by the river. The air smelled faintly of rain and salt. Seagulls called above the docks as the last light thinned across the water. On my porch, the small brass lantern waited, the one I lit every night when the sun went down. I struck a match, shielding the flame from the breeze until it caught. The lantern's glow spread softly over the railing, turning the mist gold. I watched it flicker, breathing in the calm that had taken me a lifetime to earn. My phone buzzed on the table beside me. A message from Alyssa. I hesitated before opening it, my heart quickening in that old familiar way. There was a photo, a newborn wrapped in a pale blanket. Tiny fingers curled like promises. Beneath it, a single line. Her name is Nadine. For a long moment, I couldn't move. The lantern light trembled on the page of my open notebook. Tears came quietly, not sharp like grief, but soft, like release. I placed the phone down, leaned back in my chair, and let the river wind brush my face. The world had turned a deep, forgiving blue. Somewhere beyond the water, The night began to hum, full of endings that had finally become beginnings.